Well, here we are again. As you can see, I have recently started painting Gaunt's Ghosts. Now, when I first bought this set, I was amazed at the quality of the sculpts. I'll be honest with you, this is probably my most favorite set that I've bought from Games Workshop. And as I said in a previous video, I plan on using these guys for my Deathcore of Krieg kill team. Now, when I started this, the first thing I thought was I want to paint these as best I can and take a bunch of time on it and just, go nuts, go to town. Well, then I realized I hadn't painted them for months. And I hadn't touched them, I hadn't unboxed them, I hadn't put them together. And this is partially because, and I do this to myself a lot, I put a lot of pressure on myself to try and make the paint job better, grander. And for these guys, well, yeah, that would be great. The point of this exercise was to get them onto the table with my kill team. So, in the end, in the spirit of that, I realized I should probably just give them a basic tabletop paint job. And that caused me to open them up, put them together, give them a prime, and let it go. So I decided ultimately to go ahead and do a quick and dirty, just a regular contrast paint job for these guys. And I have to say, honestly, I'm glad that I did, because if I had been trying to do, my greatest, my best on these models, I probably would not have opened them for another month or two in lieu of doing other side projects that I have, like the new Chalnath box set and my upcoming video where I explain putting together and the frustrations with the new Warcry set, Red Harvest. So with all of that in mind, I don't regret it at all. I think it was the right way to go for me. And a lot of time I do tend to put some pressure on myself to try and make the next paint job better than the last one. And while that is good, sometimes some projects just need, a quick and dirty paint job. Just something to throw it on the table and you're good to go. And that's ultimately, because my Deathcore were the same way, it was just a quick and dirty paint job. That's ultimately the same focus that I put on these, that I'm also going to probably put on the Sisters of Battle and also on the Tau from the Chalnath box set. I'm also going to do the same with Red Harvest, and I think down the line what I'll probably do is something a little different for a different release. But to get what I'm doing here, I took an old dry brush that was ratty and, tattered up, and I cut the end off of it. And I'm using the thick bristles, mainly on the side there, to actually stipple on a camo pattern. Now, of course, I was going to stipple a bunch of colors and make it look all fancy and all that, but I just realized, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it on there, just give it a test. So I'm using Basilicanum Gray, and I'm kind of just putting random dabs and splotches of different sizes on all of the camo cloaks. And that's the same thing I've done for camo in the past, is just pick a color that's darker than the color that I'm going to put over top of it. In this case, contrast colors work excellently. And as you can see here, there's just a couple of dots and splotches, and it looks a little weird right now, but once you put and I used for this camo green. Once you put the camo green over top of it, it looks excellent. Well, at least, for a quick and dirty tabletop job. And as you see here, this is me throwing on that camo green on one of the models here. And you'll see in the final shot, when everything's dry and painted and, ready to go, that it actually turns out pretty good for a quick and easy job, and for something as simple as stippling on a little bit of basilicanum gray onto a cloak and letting it dry. It actually turned out really well. So I'm going to go ahead and go into just let this run, and I'll be back in just a moment. Now at this point, I had already put the black Templar on all the leather, and I put the camo green on all the cloaks, and I was going back here to fix any black and green that had got on the skin. Not so much on the wooden parts, because honestly, leaving the black and the green and anything else that spills on it, once you put, and I used wildwood for this, contrast wildwood. Once you put that wildwood on top of those, it actually makes it look a little bit organic to have a couple of different colors in there to just make a little bit of variation. So that part is not so tough. Now the skin, on the other hand, unless you want them to look mottled or weird, it's best to go back and use your original color to change any mistakes. And in this particular case, I had used gray cere. Now I did lose a little bit of the footage, but I started painting at this point Guilliman flesh over all of the skin, and trying to, of course, not touch the cloak or the leather in any way. The leather, it's not going to matter too much, but you can still see it, even though Black Templar is very, very, it's a very strong contrast paint. You have to make sure that you don't get too much overspill on it, because you can still see some of the colors that get spilled and or brushed on there because of the fact that it pulls away from those ridges. So that's one thing to worry about. Now, about this point, this is where I started putting the wildwood on all of the wooden details that are on the bases. Now, wildwood is another one of those strong colors like Black Templar. It ends up being dark with just enough shading on the recesses to make it look pleasing to the eye. This is another one of those paints, just like Black Templar, that you want to be careful with when you're slopping it around. You don't want to get any into places that you have to clean up again later. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, I also, for belts and or any of the weapon holsters or anything like that, for a little bit of contrast, I actually used snake bite leather on those instead of the Black Templar. I didn't paint all of their leather details just straight black, because that would make the model a little bit drab. But as you can see here, I'm just kind of taking my time. If you get any on the base, that's not a problem. It's just on the model itself that you have to worry about. So I'm just, when I'm painting around the parts of the model that touch the wood, I'd just be very careful while I'm doing that, because I don't want to get any of that wildwood on anything. Alright, so for the metallics, this is one of my few deviations from the contrast paints. That includes fair skin, which I'm going to mix with the Gulliman Flesh, and Heartwood Brown that I'm going to use as my dry brush on my Sterling Mud. And actually, I'm sorry, Battlemire, Sterling Battlemire, and the Noir Black that I'm going to use for the rim of the bases. Now, on top of this metal, which is plate mail, it's just a regular metallic paint, I also use Basilicanum Gray on top of that to kind of darken it down a little bit. The only metal that I leave shining on these are any gold pieces, like for instance the belt buckles and the hilts of the knives. Those I leave shiny in gold, but for the rest of it I just kind of dull it down a little bit. Moving on to Gaunt himself, I used Blood Angel's Red to get the red details on his armor and his hat. He has a red sash, and the top of his hat also I colored those red, and the bill I used Black Templar. Any other miscellaneous details I came across, I painted those Blood Angels Red as well. Now this color is not only, and all red colors are kind of like this, I suggest that you either have a separate paint pot for your reds or your metallics, or go change your paint water afterward, because red will stick on that brush like nobody's business. Even worse than black does for some reason. So red is another one of those colors you need to be a little careful when you're when you're slopping it around the model, because of the fact that it is a very strong color. And as you can see here, it adds a really, really nice contrast to the rest of the armor. In hindsight, I kind of wish I had put maybe a red detail or two on the rest of them, just to kind of pull it out of the just to make it pop a little bit more. But hindsight is 20/20. So after mixing the fair skin with the Gulliman Flesh and doing just the raised parts of the skin and the muscles, I moved on to Retributor Armor for all of the gold bits. And like I said earlier, this is going to be belt buckles, medals, and or any kind of the knife hilts, anything like that, any other details. And on the sniper as well, I meant to mention as well, I put Blood Angel's Red on the lens of his scope. And that's the only other thing that I painted red out of this whole scheme. Now here, you'll have to excuse the light. I did move the light over so I could get a little closer on these things and get a little more light on the small details like the buckle, because the belt buckles on these guys are tiny. And I just wanted to make sure I was getting in there and not getting any gold on anything else, because gold, once you get a metallic on any of these colors, it's not coming off. You're just going to have to paint right back over top of it. And I definitely wanted to avoid that at this stage. Alright, so after putting Sterling Battlemire on all of the bases, I went back after this and put the Heartwood Brown over top of the Sterling Battlemire as a dry brush, and then just added a couple of tufts onto each base. So I honestly think it turned out really well, and I'm happy with how the paint job turned out. So like and subscribe and join my Patreon if you feel like contributing. And hopefully you found something that will help you paint Gaunt's Ghost if that's your thing. Thank you for watching.